Welcome to PwC's Policy on Demand. I'm Cindy Bloom.
And I'm Scott McCandless. It is the week of June 23rd, and this is your Monday briefing. All eyes are on the one big, beautiful bill as we enter the final week of Congress's work period before lawmakers' scheduled break for the one-week July 4th recess. Also this week, the Senate may take up the nomination of Ken Kies to be Assistant Secretary for Tax Policy, so watch for that possible vote.
And today we're going to focus on the procedural dynamics and next steps for the budget reconciliation bill as it moves through the Senate. Joining us for that conversation are Mark Prater, a managing director in PwC's Tax Policy Services practice, and George Manousos, a partner in our Federal Tax Services practice. Welcome to you both.
Good morning. Thank you.
So, Mark, let me start with you. Procedurally, what needs to happen before a final vote can be taken on the bill?
So, Cindy, here's where we are. The House has passed its bill. That bill is in a good form for reconciliation. It's a reconciliation bill and it's a revenue bill. So it's it's the bill that should be amended in the Senate. So the action is now in the Senate. So the Senate process is different because reconciliation is an exception to the Senate rules. And that gives the Senate some advantages, the majority some advantages, but also brings some restrictions in terms of how the instructions work in the bird rule process. So right now, the Senate is working through 3 different exercises to get that bill in good form so that there's an amendment that will open debate. And at that point, any senator can exercise his or her right to enforce those restrictions with respect to the bird rule. So there's 3 exercises going on, all focused on getting that text together and then going through the process. So the first exercise is consideration of the Finance Committee submission that we saw last week and the revenue table that we saw over the weekend. We're still waiting on some of the spending side stuff, but working through that, members are reviewing that. Some have expressed themselves publicly, some privately. And so they're going through that. And the leader and Senator Graham, who's the chairman of the Budget Committee, who has kind of the whole bill in front of him and the whole process, they will be working with Senator Crapo and others to work through those issues and make some changes, technical, policy, revenue changes. The second activity exercise is the bird rule process itself, and that is in full force right now. You've seen reports of the parliamentarian providing advice on various issues in terms of each of these submissions. She and her team are going to be hearing from Republicans and Democrats on the finance title, perhaps today, according to press reports, likely today. So they'll be going through that on a number of issues. And then that will also inform this document. Then the third thing is a little more complicated. That's where the leadership team, Senator Thune and Senator Brasso and others, will be conversing with their counterparts in the House, their members, and the administration to see what kind of things have to be in the end game, which could come in a wraparound amendment at the stage of the process. So those are 3 exercises going on right now.
Mark, you had mentioned that the House bill will come over from the Senate in fairly good shape, and it seems as though the Senate and House are working together behind the scenes so that if there is a Senate vote, it can go back to the House and perhaps face just one further vote. Can you talk a little bit about that interaction and what some of the positives and potential dangers are for this bill heading back to the House?
Sure, Scott. So the benefit for the Republicans is they start off with agreement on a big chunk of this policy and revenue and politics. So the TCJ extensions, which we see in the revenue table that was produced over the weekend, are incorporated in a current policy baseline, which is different from current law, as we've talked before. But they largely agree on that notion. So that's a big chunk of policy, big chunk of money. With respect to that, the one tricky issue there is the SALT cap, which has been an issue for a long time. just big differences there. And you're seeing those in terms of the initial position Finance Committee took. The other thing, Scott, is to the extent they are looking to this end game, both sides have to be really confident in the positions that they take, both that the leadership can hold its folks together in the Senate, and that it will produce the result that they want in the House, which is a majority. So they have that, it's focused on that. There are a number of issues there. We talked a little bit about Medicaid. It's certainly a hot spot right now. There are some other spending side issues the parliamentarian has advised on that they're going to have to go back through. But all of this is directed to that single agreement at the end of the day, the end of the process in the Senate. Do you have a product that can pass the House?
And just a quick follow-up before we get to George. What are the prospects for it passing this week?
So, Sindhu, the prospects, I think in terms of the larger numbers, when you see the current policy number that came out of the Joint Committee, you see where some of the spending committees are. They've got to go back and revise some things there, for instance, on the SNAP program and some of the other things. But the Senate, I think, when you look at those numbers, is showing a lot of sensitivity to kind of what the traffic can bear in the House in terms of how much can they add to the deficit here, and which has always been a huge issue in the House. So I was looking at those numbers and see that they're closer than that. But there are a lot of things going on under the surface. Underneath those numbers, they have to work out a lot of policy, technical, revenue issues, et cetera, underneath that. So I think they have a shot, but certainly the timeline is getting compressed. Right. If we're having bird rule discussions today on the finance title, there are no doubt going to have to be either follow-up adjustments to that, depending on issues that may fall out, and further activities there. So it's an aggressive schedule.
Right.
It's not out of question that they can meet it.
Right. Thanks for that. And George, why don't we come to you and talk about building bonus and what the key differences are between the House and Senate bills, specifically on the domestic provisions. And as you've had some time to digest the bill, what are your reactions now?
Yeah, so on the first part, Sindhu, a lot of significant changes on some of the domestic provisions. I'll start with 174 Cap A, which would provide a domestic R&D full expensing beginning in 2025. The Senate bill does have three options to transition. You can either keep amortizing your unamortized costs that have been capitalized from the last 3 years, or you could do a method change in 2025 and either get a 1-year 41A adjustment or get a 2-year 41A adjustment. So it's good to have some optionality there. 163J, permanent add back of the DAD, depreciation, amortization, depletion, beginning in 2026. It does have a new provision in there that would provide that other than interest that's required to be capitalized statutorily under 263 Cap A F or 263 little g, that 163J would apply prior to any other capitalization provisions, whether it's required, permitted, elected, what have you. This is really targeted to prevent the elective capitalization provisions that are available to taxpayers to capitalize interest into the basis of various property that would pull interest expense out of 163J calculation. So that would no longer be available. Regular historical bonus depreciation, as we've known, that would also be permanently extended. That's the last of the big three to be permanently extended. 174 Cap A, the first, as I mentioned, and 163J, and finally bonus. They do have an election to claim 40% bonus for the first tax year ending after January 19th, 25. So really for 2025 calendar years to maintain kind of the status quo of 40% if you want for that 1 year. Sindhu, as you mentioned, building bonus under 168N. A few changes here as well. The first was if you own a building and you lease it to someone that is engaged in a qualified production activity, that activity will not qualify. It seems like the lessor/owner has to be engaged in the qualified activity themselves. It then added in a couple restrictions. The first being that property could not be used by the taxpayer prior to the time of acquisition, and that it has to not be acquired from a related party, rules along those lines. And then it has a new rule to refine the meaning of what's a qualified product eligible to be produced in the building. And it doesn't include food or beverages prepared in the building as a retail establishment. That would sound familiar to 199, or if you prepared food or beverages in a retail establishment, that wasn't eligible for 199. Seems like they're trying to exclude food or beverages prepared in a retail establishment building from being qualifying activity as well. And then lastly, they changed the term, or they proposed to change the term, software engineering activities to be software development or engineering activities. And those would be among the categories of spaces in a building or activities that do not qualify the building for bonus depreciation. Unfortunately, we don't have any further details on many of the threshold questions, like what is manufacturing, what is substantial transformation, what is engineering. So it looks like we're going to have to wait a while for IRS and Treasury to issue some procedural guidance, administrative guidance on that. Two others, we did have a CAMT fix in the Senate bill. That would be for intangible drilling costs. That would be an AFSI adjustment, just like depreciation. So you add back any book IDCs, and then you deduct tax IDCs in determining AFSI. And then a final provision dealing with litigation funding reforms. This was not in the House bill, as well as CAMT was not in the House bill. It addresses where third parties fund litigation, and if the litigation is successful, then the third party funder gets a percentage of the proceeds. There's been a longstanding question as to what's the character of that income. Is it ordinary income or tax at the preferential capital gains rates? This provision would say that the settlement proceeds, or the gain from the settlement, would be taxed at the highest individual rate, plus a 3.8% tax on top of that. So close to 42% in the individual context. So a new provision proposed by the Senate bill. Lots of changes compared to the House, so we'll see what we get.
George, with regard to the bill and the companies, the conversation you're having with companies, what are some concerns you're hearing, and maybe even some areas where companies are excited about what might be coming in terms of provisions as this evolves?
Yeah, great question, Scott. I think they're obviously excited about the permanency of 174 Cap A, 163J, and bonus depreciation. You know, the back and forth with temporary and phasing out kind of makes it very hard to project taxable income going forward. With all of these provisions, though, because you have some winners, you have some losers, it's all about modeling this out. Obviously, 174 and bonus and 163J, those are all going to be favorable provisions that will drive taxable income down. Taxable income being lower is normally what we want, but that's not always what taxpayers are seeking, because if you have lower taxable income, that might now expose a taxpayer to paying CAMT, the corporate alternative minimum tax. It may limit the utilization of other tax attributes like foreign tax credits or general business credits. So again, I think taxpayers are going to want to model out how all these provisions play together. Many of these provisions have an election out. So I think Congress recognizes that taxpayers may not always want the good because it may have a negative impact on other tax attributes. So you could elect out of 174, you could elect out of bonus depreciation. So there's some flexibility there for taxpayers. It's just really modeling based on what your fact pattern is. And do you want all of these benefits, or do you want to forego some of them for the benefit of claiming some other tax attribute?
Makes sense. George, thank you so much. Great insights and advice as always. Mark, thank you as well. Thank you both.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
My pleasure.
And for our viewers, in case you missed it, the latest Week in Review with Pat Brown is linked in the description of this episode, along with other episodes filmed at PwC's Financial Services Tax Leaders meeting in Rome last week.
And a programming note that our coverage of congressional action on the reconciliation bill continues this week. Next week, we are off for the Independence Day holiday, and we'll be back the week of July 7th. The reconciliation bill and the oppressive heat are not the only things taking up the oxygen in Washington. And for that and many other reasons, we appreciate you spending this time with us. Have a good rest of the week and take care.